Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk, and we're gonna, it's the last show before the election, so we're gonna be doing election predictions. I also have a story out of Grand Forks that we're going to be commenting on as well in the legislative races up there, which have gotten probably some of the ugliest campaigning I have seen in the history of North Dakota politics. I mean, it's really gotten very personal, very ugly up there. We're going to be talking about that. But before we get to any of that, we're going to be talking to Josh Gallion. He is our incumbent auditor. He's been there for 2 terms. We had his opponent, Tim Lamb, on the program earlier this week. And of course, we had Mr. Lamb on. I wanted to give the incumbent a chance to come on as well. Josh, how are you?
Doing great, Rob. Appreciate the opportunity. Chad, how are you? I'm good. I'm very good, as we discussed before the show started.
Yeah, that's old news now. Nobody cares about the World Series 2024.
Before we get into this, I'm here talking to 2 Yankees fans who are sort of licking their wounds a little bit because of the Little League like play the other night, Game 5.
The Yankees need to find the corpse of Tom Amansky and reanimate him and teach these guys how to play some fundamental baseball. I will admit, I was very nice in our conversation. When you called me, I said, I don't want to take a single thing away from what the Dodgers did. The Yankees made mistakes. The Dodgers didn't. It's the Yankees' fault that they lost. But man, does it hurt. It really feels like we lost it rather than the Dodgers won. And I say that, I don't want to make that sound unfair to the Dodgers. The Dodgers played good baseball and they won, fair and square.
Listen, the end of the day, there's one team having a parade today, and it's not going to be in New York.
Yeah, that's fair. As much as that hurts, that's fair. I just wish if the Dodgers were going to beat us, I would have rather been swept with Shohei Ohtani hitting good pitches out of the stadium than what we did. It adds a degree of humiliation to the defeat. So anyway, that's hard. This also, by the way, not why anybody's tuning into this show. Not why Auditor Gallion came on the show. Josh, I am so sorry with our preoccupation.
Rob, I appreciate we're sulking. I really wish Garrett Cole would have covered first base, got that out. I think that would have changed the entire outcome of that game. The Yankees probably would have taken that. We would be playing Game 6 and hopefully Game 7, where that parade would have been in New York, but it didn't work out that way. And here we are. Shut up. We'll talk about politics.
I hope Garrett Cole gets back to the World Series and does something. Otherwise, his legacy is being cocky and walking off the field and not covering first base, because that's some Bill Buckner-esque nonsense going on there. Okay, I swear to God, we're going to talk about politics now. Josh,
let's do it.
My traditional question for every incumbent candidate who comes on for a debate or whatever is to ask them, why should the voters give you another 4 years in office?
So the North Dakota State Auditor's Office is one of the resources that the public has to know how their government is spending their money. And the thing that I've really pushed since becoming state auditor is modernizing the office, making our information more accessible, more transparent. When I first got there 8 years ago, we had walls of filing cabinets with paper records. And that was the only place those records were located. We have made tremendous strides in getting all of that information digital. We're making it more easily available at everybody's fingertips. We've communicated, developed communication strategies. We want to communicate where people are. And that's really how life works. When I'm out campaigning, I'm going to the people aren't coming to me. And so the auditor's office, we want to make sure that that information is getting out there through all of these various means, whether it's our website. We have social media. We now have a YouTube channel where we provide education and training materials. And so really being that resource for not just the public, but our local governments, our state agencies. And we have done a fantastic job. We have a great team, but we have so much more that we want to do. The information right now within audit reports, it's really locked up within PDFs. And so what we are working on developing is databases where we can start pulling some of this information out, looking at revenues, expenditures, debt, putting that in a format where people can actually see and analyze. And so we want to be that transparency piece for government, getting that information into the hands of everybody, whether it's legislators or agency heads or commissioners and the public, and even those in the media, so that they can see the information that we are collecting.
Even those in the media, even you scalawags in the media. Yeah, all right, I get it.
Yeah, Josh, thanks for coming on. I want to start with a question about Williston. A few weeks ago, the Williston School District had reported that they were going to have to pay for a private audit because the auditor's office had lost much of their staff in the Fargo office. Then I saw a report a couple days ago. I think you were up there and basically saying, hey, we're still here. We can still help you with this thing. Can you talk a little bit about that process, how we went from the school district somehow interpreted that the auditor's office didn't have the staff to help them, and now it sounds like you might have that?
I have a little bit to add because I did look into this, and I was able to get an email from the school district that came from one of your auditors, Josh, that did have the words, "Our entire Fargo office quit," or words to that effect. But the school district, I don't think, was misinterpreting that. I mean, that was pretty blatantly said. When I contacted your office, your spokesperson said that auditor had misspoken. I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, so that, we recently lost a couple of staff. When you have great staff in the auditor's office, and our auditors are highly skilled, highly trained, they're constantly recruited. LinkedIn is a fantastic tool for recruitment and retention. It's also a terrible tool because everybody's using it and they're trying to hire away your great people. So what happened is we did lose a couple people. We had an audit manager who sent an email probably a little prematurely and maybe out of some of the outcome of a couple people departing our office. Kind of sent that. He regrets sending that. He regrets phrasing it the way we did. And so that's where we reached out to the school districts and really just clarified. No, we can still do this audit. When we let the dust settle and reevaluated all of our work product and our audit schedule, Williston, we still have on our schedule. We're planning on starting that engagement in February if the school so chooses to use the state auditor's office. That is where in state law, these local governments, they have the choice. They can use a private sector firm, and we really appreciate our private partners out there across the state. In North Dakota, the state auditor's office, we only do about 15% of government auditing. The other 85% is really handled by these private sector firms. So we really appreciate their work and their efforts to help create transparency in government. In the end, we looked at our schedule. We are able to do that audit in February. We did submit a cost proposal. So yeah, it just really kind of came down to, maybe a knee-jerk reaction, an email that we probably should have thought about before we hit send. And, hopefully we can get things clarified, and we are more than happy to provide those auditing services to Williston.
Josh, you started out talking about some of the technological innovations that you made or communications innovations that you made. And I want to congratulate you on that because I agree. I think you've done a really good job in terms of communicating. One of the criticisms that's come up from myself and others, though, is at times it can feel like your office is sensationalizing findings. And I think maybe one fair explanation for that is we're communicating findings more overtly than we have in the past, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But obviously, I had a story about several local governments who just felt like your office abused them a little bit. You went on radio and you were talking about the audit findings and everything, and they were feeling like you were sensationalizing things or taking things out of context that were in their audits. Can you respond to that?
So the goal of the auditor's office is never to sensationalize. But one of the roles of the auditor's office, especially when you look at auditing standards, we have an obligation to inform our stakeholders. And that does include legislators, agency heads, and even within our auditing standards, it is the public. And so the piece of the auditor's office, when we're out conducting this work, we need to have that education component, informing the people how their government is spending their money. So our goal is not to sensationalize. Our goal is to make sure that we can get this information into the hands of everybody who needs it. And sometimes, yes, we need to provide some of that explanation, but our goal is never to go beyond sensationalizing. We want to stick to the facts. And that's something that we really strive to accomplish.
Josh, one of the things that I think has come out of what Rob was just talking about there is often a confrontational relationship between the auditor's office and the legislature, or I should say certain legislators. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing to sort of build those relationships between your office and the legislature so it's not confrontational? But again, I think the goal of the auditor's office is to help political subs, help the legislators sort of, make sure that our tax dollars are being spent right. Can you talk about that relationship and what you're doing to build that back up? If you see a problem, maybe you don't see a problem there.
We always want to make sure that we have positive, constructive relationships, but we also acknowledge that auditing doesn't happen without some conflict. There's always going to be some conflict in the role of auditing. Not everybody is going to like the outcomes of those audits. The work that we do is supported by documentation and evidence. And so we are really working on doing a better job at getting more information into the hands of some of these legislators who are unhappy, who may not fully understand some of the facts and some of the information that we've collected. So we've beefed up our newsletters. We send emails now to the Legislative Audit and Fiscal Review Committee, giving them updates. So that some of these things where I think in the past, maybe they felt that they were caught off guard, we want to make sure that we are giving that information to them in a time frame where they can digest it and have a chance to go through it. And I always welcome their phone calls. If they reach out to me and would like to know a little bit more, I'm always happy to sit down and visit with any of them to make sure that they fully understand the information that we've put out there to the public.
One of the things, because again, I maybe some of this comes down to like tone or style, but for example, in Williston, they were having a recall election for their school board, as they are wont to do. That seems almost to becoming a tradition up there. And not a very successful one at that, because the voters keep sticking with the people in office. But right before or contemporaneous to a recall election up there, you were invited to town and you spoke about your auditing that school district. Now, to me and others observers, that looked like you were kind of putting your finger on the scale and trying to help the recall election. Your argument would probably just be, hey, I was invited out there and I'm just talking about the facts of the audit. But I mean, speak a little bit. Do you understand where critics might look at that situation and think, gosh, it looks like he's taken a side here?
Again, that is our position. We conduct our work. It's all based on the auditing standards, being independent, objective. And yes, when the public would like me to provide some information on what we identified within these audit reports, the general public deserves to know. And the goal is never to put our finger on any scale. The work of the auditor's office is not political. There's no reference of any politics in any auditing standards or even in Century Code. But our goal is to make sure that when there are people out there that need to make decisions, they're doing so from a position of knowledge and understanding. And anytime I get those kind of offers to come out and explain some of the work that we're doing, to me, I see that as an opportunity to educate people.
Josh, we had your opponent on, was that earlier this week? Time doesn't matter.
Wednesday, yes. It was Wednesday, Chad.
Come on.
One of the things we talked to Mr. Lamb about is the fact that he got the endorsement of the Fargo form and the form communications, which obviously is a pretty bizarre thing for a Democrat to get that endorsement. From your perspective, like, one, does that matter in terms of getting your reelection or not reelection? And is there something that the form is missing in terms of the work you're doing at the auditor's office that led them to that conclusion that Tim Lamb would be a better auditor than you?
And I just want to interject here, since I work for the forum. I don't have anything to do with the editorial board making those decisions. They don't consult me. I'm not on it. I'm not part of it. I learned about it the same time everybody else did when they published it.
So that's a great question. I look at some of the things happening nationally where you've got some of these major news outlets deciding to not endorse because of the divisiveness. And I actually think that's a better approach. I don't know that newspaper outlets should be exercising their influence in endorsing candidates. Provide the facts, provide the information, and let the voters decide. So to me, the newspaper endorsements are not something that I find extremely important. I'm very grateful to have the endorsement of Donald Trump, hopefully our next president of the United States. And that to me is the one that, that matters to me a lot more than a newspaper endorsement.
Can I ask a follow-up really quick?
Yes.
Would you feel differently if you would have gotten the endorsement?
I've never really been big on the newspaper endorsements. I don't know. I can't even tell you right now off the top of my head if I've ever been endorsed in the past by any of these newspapers. It's not something that I think is, overly important or overly critical to campaigns and to races. Again, to me, I think these media outlets should remain objective, should remain independent. And when they start making those types of endorsements using the name of their companies, they're trying to put their finger on the scale.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with newspaper companies doing it, and I don't have a problem with them not doing it. I would argue they don't matter much anymore, and maybe I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, but I don't think they sway voters at all, one way or the other.
Look at that, all three of us agree on something.
Yeah, there we go.
Matter one bit at all.
There we go. You said just a moment ago that it's important for the auditor to remain non-political, and then you just told us that Donald Trump endorsed you. Now, the situation where we elect the auditor, and the auditor is unlike, say, like the superintendent is a partisan office. And let's be honest, the superintendent is often a partisan race. The candidates for that, Democrats and Republicans, often seek party endorsement. So this isn't a situation that you created, but how do you balance that? Because there's a lot of people, looking at your "Make Auditing Great Again" signs, kind of a play on Donald Trump's slogan. And then also you're saying, well, we've got to keep auditing non-political. How do we square that?
Well, to me, you have to differentiate. Yes, I am a partisan politician. I'm endorsed by the Republican Party. I am a Republican in this state. Through the campaign process, that is how we vet candidates. That's how we understand their principles, their values, their beliefs. But to me, once the election is over, once you get into actually doing the job, there is no room for politics in the work. And I feel like the auditor's office over the last 8 years has done an amazing job in keeping that separation. While I'm campaigning and running, yes, I'm running as a Republican. I support Republicans. I help other Republicans win elections. But the minute that election is over, it's time to get to work, and there's no room for politics in our day-to-day job.
Josh, one of the things that your opponent brought up last week is the need for more transparency in the legacy fund. I'm still not entirely clear what the auditor's role is in that, but do you see a need for more transparency? And is there a role for the auditor to maybe be hands-on in terms of the state investment board? Is there something that your office or the auditor's office can be doing, as this issue around transparency in the legacy fund seems to be sort of hot right now in the last few weeks? We're largely driven by some legislators in District 12.
Yes. So, great question. I would say ultimately, no, the auditor's office does not have really a role to play in that transparency, because I think the transparency that people want to know about are some of the investment strategies, where those funds are going.
the role the auditor's office plays, and we outsource the audit of the retirement investment office where the state investment board sits within, and they administer all of the state's investments. The legacy fund is also part of our annual comprehensive financial report. And so we have very good transparency on what those totals are, what the amounts going into those funds are. We have fiscal transparency right now. I don't think it's a role for the auditor to be in the middle of the investment portion of that and the inner workings. That is a role for that state investment board. That's a management function. And for the auditor's office, we have to be very mindful of not crossing over and impacting our independence. We cannot be part of management decisions. We cannot be involved in any of the management decisions. And once we do, we impair our independence. We can no longer be the auditor for that entity. So we have to keep clear separation from the inner workings of those organizations. We are there purely looking at the financials, and we're always backwards looking. The events have already occurred when the auditor's office takes place. We're there to make sure that the funds are in the right place. If there's any transfers or any of the earnings, all of those happen in accordance with the laws, the rules, the structures, anything based on our criteria that we've determined. That is the role of the auditor, is to make sure it happened the way it was supposed to. When you start getting into more transparency and some of the contracts and some of those decisions being made, the auditor cannot be a part of those decisions. We have to stay separate because that is up for the management, that board. That's up to them. And those decisions then need to take place between them and the legislature. If there are different century codes or different laws that they need to mandate to make that stuff more transparent, that's between the state investment board and the legislature. The auditor has no role in that.
Yeah, that was my take on it too. I mean, really kind of the debate about the legacy fund is a policy debate. Like, philosophically, what should we be doing with these investments? Should we be investing them towards maximizing revenues? Should we be investing them with an eye towards benefiting the state in other ways that are not revenues? And we can have that debate. It's a good debate to have, but I don't know what auditing has to do with that.
Well, what we would wind up doing, Rob, is if we had that strategy or we had that policy in place, what we would then evaluate from an auditing standpoint is when we're looking back at that previous 2-year period, did they adhere to that policy? Or were they making investments that were contrary? Were they making investments in areas where maybe, there's a lot of talk about some of the geopolitical issues around the globe? Should we be investing our resources in some of those countries that maybe don't have our best interests? If that's part of the policy, that can then be part of the criteria that we can evaluate. Did the state investment board invest based on that policy?
But it has to be in policy first. Like it has to be in century code or something like that.
Century code, the state investment board policy, those then become the criteria that we use to evaluate the performance of and the decisions of those actions. That's the role of the auditor, but that's always backward looking. Those things have already been done. It's not about going forward.
Tell me about audit costs, because that's been one sort of consistent criticism we've heard of your office. Certain members of the legislature talk about it, but also, local governments talk about it around the state, is that they feel like the cost of audits from your office has gone up significantly. And that's important. You may have noticed we're having a debate about property taxes. So the cost of local government is very much on the mind of voters. And that's a cost. When your office, sends an audit bill, it's not the county commissioners paying that out of there or the city council or whatever the volunteer fire department. Ultimately that falls on the taxpayers. So respond to that criticism about costs of audits from your office.
So I would say, yes, costs have gone up with our operating costs. When you look at our team, we have to charge a service for our a fee for our services. That's the way the North Dakota Century Code is established. Our local government auditors are special funded. There are no general fund dollars coming from the legislature to fund their operations, and so those folks have to go out and essentially generate the revenue. That money comes back in to cover their operating in conducting those services. No different than a private firm would be operating across the state. And we have seen the private firms costs increase. And I think that has a lot to do with the inflationary factors that we're seeing across the country. Everything is costing more. The cost of salaries, the cost of travel, everything that goes into all of that, and what we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, it has gone up considerably. And all of that then is reflected in a lot of those costs. It's not just the North Dakota State Auditor's Office. We do look at costs from the private sector. When we do cost proposals out there for our local government clients, we are not out of line. And in fact, most cases, we are a less expensive option than the private sector firms.
Josh, you had mentioned earlier, I think when we were talking about Williston, that your office does about 15% of the local political sub audits. The rest are done in the private sector. This had not occurred to me, though. Is there a conflict between, the public and the private sort of fighting for government contracts? And how does that work? Is it just up to the political sub to decide who serves that function best for them? Is it strange that there's a public entity competing against private entities in terms of looking for this business? It just hadn't occurred to me until you mentioned that 15% number, that there could be some weirdness.
So that's a great question. The way the North Dakota Century Code is structured is that the state auditor's office is ultimately responsible for all government auditing in the state of North Dakota. And then we get down to the next section for local governments, where they can then choose a private sector firm, or essentially it falls back onto the shoulders of the state auditor's office. And for the longest time, the private sector was handling, a bulk of things. But over COVID, what we saw is, we had massive retirements across the state in every sector. Auditing was not, spared from any of that. So we had private firms actually dropping clients. We had one firm that was dropping 25 or 30 clients. We had other private firms, they were not taking on any new clients. And we had several retirements of long-term private firms who provided these services that stopped. And so when they stop providing those services, those responsibilities fall back on the North Dakota State Auditor's Office as kind of the backstop. So that's where our goal is not necessarily to compete. When we've got the private sector out there, we really appreciate our private sector partners. I have no problem with them taking the lead on providing a lot of those services. I'm a private sector fan. I think the private sector is a great way to go. It's just when the private sector does not offer those services and clients fall behind, when clients and these audits aren't happening on a regular basis and we get too far delinquent, that's when we see bad things have a higher probability of happening. When you start seeing fraud, embezzlement, and it saddens me to say, but I've seen more of that than I ever thought I would here in North Dakota. It occurs more frequently than I would care to admit.
Last question. The legislature, somewhat controversially, I think probably from your perspective, implemented or funded a performance audit for your office. I know that you opposed this. They appropriated, was it $500,000? I think it was, if I'm remembering right. They've had some trouble in the interim getting that off the ground. I don't know that they've made it very far with that, but talk to that a little bit. And I know that's kind of related to Chad's question earlier about your relationship with the legislature. I think that probably motivated it to a degree, but I know you've said you welcome the audit and everything else, but I guess speak to that a little bit. How do you think that's going to go?
Again, we welcome the audit, the auditor's office, and I believe in continuous improvement. So if there is something that comes out of this audit where these private auditing firm, if they find a way for us to do something better, we welcome the information. The reason I think this has been unnecessary is the North Dakota State Auditor's Office, we get a financial statement audit. So all of our financial records are gone through by a private firm here in North Dakota. We also participate in the National State Auditors Association peer review program, which means they come in and they evaluate the performance of our audits. They're looking at our documentation, adherence to standards. They go through numerous reports verifying that we are following the auditing standards, following the laws, and that's more of a performance-based auditing. And so we've gone through both of those. We even have a federal program. I don't know if you guys are aware, but we have a federal mineral royalty division. They also have had a peer review in the past, but that division, if there are federal lands leased for oil extraction, those royalty payments, we want to make sure that those amounts are being paid properly to the federal government. The great thing about that is if we know the federal share, we know the state share, and what should be coming back to the state of North Dakota and local governments. That division also gets a peer review. So we go through numerous reviews, and in all of the cases since I've been the state auditor, we've had very excellent outcomes from all of those. And that's why I feel that, this has been unnecessary. It's a very expensive process, but it's here. We're doing it. We're working with our auditors, and
is that ongoing now? Like that's happening now?
It is ongoing now, so I can't talk about the details of it other than we are complying with all requests. We are providing any and all information that they ask for. And being auditors ourselves, we understand that time is money. And with all of the criticism about costs, we're trying to make sure that we can get them this information as fast as possible so that hopefully we can lower that cost for the North Dakota taxpayers.
Josh, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault Podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Just finished up with Josh Gallion, who, as critical as I have been of Josh Gallion, he is somebody who answers every text that I send him. He agrees, obviously, to come on and do interviews. He doesn't hide. He doesn't shy away. I've always appreciated about him. I do think that at times his office has been, I think they have sensationalized audits. And I'd say that I don't think he's said things wrong. Like, I don't think he's out lying. I do think that sometimes he takes things in the context or the way he delivers the information makes them sound worse than they are. And I think that creates a hostile, auditing is tough even to begin with, because you come in and you have to have trust, and they know, nobody likes being audited, right? Like, even if you're honest about your taxes, you're worried, did I mess something up? Was I doing something wrong? There has to be a level of trust there. And I think, and it's not just coming from one local government entity. You have a community ambulance service, you have a volunteer fire department, you have counties, you have school districts who are all kind of saying the same thing, which is, we're very worried that when they come in, they're going to make mountains out of molehills.
Right. But Rob, I think your question about balancing the nonpartisan nature of an audit with, he's a politician, right? And so there are going to be times where the elected partisan auditor, if he's politically ambitious, which I think Josh Gallion is going to maybe sensationalize things a little bit, right? That's just the nature of the beast. And I think it irritates legislators, and it makes these poor local political subs who don't have professional staff and whatever really, really uncomfortable. So I think that is something the auditor's office has to figure out, how to be a partner with these small local political subs, or else nobody's going to want them to come in and help them.
Agreed. And I don't know how to solve it, because on the other hand, I like that the auditor is elected. I like that the auditor only has to be accountable to the people of North Dakota. The problem is, the flip side of that is the reality of electoral politics is there's a certain amount of, I don't know what you want to call it, stagecraft, a certain amount of not entrepreneurship, that's the wrong word. You know what I mean, though, entertainment factor in it now, perhaps more than ever. And we got to remember, Gallion's predecessor, which, by the way, do people understand? We had a auditor named Bob Peterson for a couple of decades, and before that, we had an auditor named Bob Peterson for a couple of decades. And the thing is that the second Bob Peterson, who was the son of the first Bob Peterson, his middle name was Robert, not his first name. But when he ran on the ballot, he ran as Bob Peterson. And I don't know that people understood that we started electing a different person at some point, but he was somebody who was not at all politically ambitious. And in some ways, I appreciated that about him, because he wasn't trying to move up to the next level. I think Josh, whatever he might say publicly, I think very much would like to move up a level. He'd like to maybe run for governor one day. He'd like to maybe run for Congress one day. I don't know. But I think we potentially run into problems, because the natural thing to do is to want to use what you're doing in your current office to get you to the next office.
That's what politicians do. Just going back to Bob Peterson really quick. When I was involved in Democrat politics and recruiting candidates during that time, there's always the joke that Democrats should just find some dude named Bob Peterson and put him on the ballot and just see what happens, because clearly North Dakotans liked having an auditor named Bob Peterson as their auditor. So anyway.
Chad's looking at me weird because I was blowing kisses. My wife walked in the room and I blew a kiss to him. I was not blowing kisses at you, Chad.
Here's the deal, Rob. I assumed that was the case because that's never happened before to me on this show or anywhere else for that matter.
Your wife doesn't blow kisses at you?
Well, here's what I will say. I just never fancied you to be the big romantic blowing kisses every time your bride walks into the house.
Oh, you have no idea.
I don't want to know. Well, no.
Okay, we won't go down that rail. We are going off the rails a little bit. All right, we got to talk about this story out of Grand Forks, District 42. This is a tough one. Mm-hmm. Sarah Grossbauer is a first-time candidate. She is an employee of North Dakota United, which you work for. I want to make sure that's out in the the record. I had a picture land in my inbox that purports to be her in a bathroom. What you can see is she's standing there. Somebody else is leaning over an iPhone that a third person is holding up. She has a rolled up piece of currency to her nose. She appears to be snorting something. Sarah's standing there looking on. I was told that Sadie Hansen, who is she lost in the June primary earlier this year. She's a Republican candidate in District 42, that she was the one who had taken the picture. I reached out to Sadie. Sadie confirmed that she took the picture. I told Sadie that if I needed her to talk on the record, she agreed to talk on the record. She said that she was in a bathroom. She witnessed cocaine use between these three girls. Sadie says that she didn't participate in that cocaine use. I then went to Sarah and I asked her. She confirmed that the picture is authentic. She questioned Hansen's motivations for leaking the photo. And then she also did not answer specific questions about whether or not she was using in that photo. She did not answer questions, about whether she said, I shouldn't say that. She did say that she's not currently using. She did say she has experimented in the past. I did follow up with specific questions. She stopped answering my questions yesterday. That's where this story stands. Obviously, I would say from a 30,000 foot view, it doesn't really reflect well on any of these young women, that they were all in the bathroom. By the way, the picture was taken in early October of 2023. So just a little over a year ago. The fact that Sadie Hansen held on to this picture and I shouldn't say that I got it from a third party. The fact that this picture though showed up right before the election, make of that what you will. Obviously, and frankly, right now I'm getting it from the right and the left. On having written that story, I think it's important. I think it's important one for the voters to see. I think very rarely, politicians has become so polished, and I think anytime you can, somebody pulls back the curtain a little bit and we can see what's going on in the background, I think that's important. But that's the story that's out there.
Yeah, I did. You talking about you're getting it from the right and the left. You sent me some screen grabs, some comments, and there was one that's a very conservative critic of you that said, "Oh, more high school garbage from Port," and then another conservative criticism of you for not doing the story fast enough or whatever. So it's one of those things where you can't win. So here's what I would say. I think, Rob, your story is completely fair that you did the story. I think that you did it in a respectful way. I think the fact that Sadie Hansen was in a room with three people potentially doing cocaine and she's the District 42 chair is relevant to the story. I mean, I think that your story was fair. I think the criticism of you not doing it fast enough is BS, frankly. So here's what I would say. Sarah screwed up. Actually, I'm going to back up. You mentioned that she works at North Dakota United. That is true. And I'll also just say I've known her dad for a long, long time, for probably 20, 25 years. So these are people that I know. There is no doubt that Sarah absolutely screwed up and made a big mistake, potentially a legal mistake, before she was a candidate. And I think, again, the fairness of this story is you're providing information to the voters of District 42 to determine if this matters to them or not, right? I mean, that's ultimately what this comes down to, is voters have to make the decision if this is something, and what that line is. Like, what is the personal ethical line that you have to cross? That's going to be the voters who have to make the decision. I think people knowing this is not a terrible thing. Do I wish that the voters would have known it maybe 6 weeks ago rather than, here's the deal. The political reality is that the races in District 42 and District 18 have gotten really ugly. And this is a response to some of the ugliness around some of the Republican candidates up there also having some issues in the personal nature that have been brought to light. So it's an ugly campaign, and voters up there are going to have to determine what matters.
In some additional context, both Sadie and Sarah characterized their past relationship as friends. They apparently knew each other in high school, which speaks to maybe the timing of the release of the photo. I would tell you, if I had the photo 6 weeks ago, I would have done pretty much the same story. I can't control when I was made aware of it. Sadie was aware of it the whole time, but you can argue this was a former friend, and this is something of a Rubicon to cross. So I don't know. I mean, it's up. I mean, the thing is, I included all of that context as well. You can evaluate that as well. One thing is we had the Scott Meyer thing up there, which we were pretty tough on as well. Yep. And frankly, I'm inclined to feel the same way about Sarah. Now she's not an incumbent, so it's somewhat different situation. She also cannot, much as with Scott, they cannot just remove themselves from the ballot at this point. They're on the ballot whether they want to be or not. There's no mechanism by which, by the way, tens of thousands of people in North Dakota have already voted. In fact, over 100,000 people statewide have already voted. I don't know how many thousands and thousands in Grand Forks specifically.
Over 10,000 have already voted in Grand Forks. I looked at the numbers yesterday.
Right, and then I don't know how many of those are in District 42 specifically, but there's no. I mean, she's on the ballot. I guess the question is, if she ends up winning election, should she be replaced by somebody else? And that process would be essentially she would resign, and the local Democratic committee could appoint somebody else. My inclination is to say yes, and that this is coming from a deep place of personal frustration that I have had, and we've talked about it. When I wrote a column recently laying out mostly Republican misdeeds in office. I am tired of this. I don't think we have to accept people who have these sorts of things in their background. I think there are a lot of people out there who don't have this sort of thing in their background who could serve in that office. That's where I'm at. And I don't think it'll happen. If Sarah, and by the way, I don't think Sarah's going to win in District 42. We'll see what happens.
Hey, the prediction part is the second part of this. Come on, man.
We're gonna do that later. I don't think she's gonna win, but she could, and if she does, I think she ought to step down maybe and let the Democrats appoint somebody else to that office.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you said is you have a list of Republicans who have these misdeeds in office, and this was a misdeed that was done before she was a candidate and not in office. And again, I think that voters need to make the determination if that matters. I think there's a difference between a candidate or a sitting senator threatening their opponent while they're sitting senator and somebody doing something before they're a candidate. That's where I'm at, but I think people need to decide. And I think in District 42, again, we talked about the ugliness around that. You've got Claire Corey with the DUI a year ago. You got Emily O'Brien with residence issues, plus a DUI early on in her career, plus an ethics investigation going on. You've got the other candidate, Doug Ozwowski, who was endorsed by the Brandon Pritchard group and is sort of part of this far-right caucus. It seemed like the only people without any sort of personal baggage in this race are Carol Haugen and Rod Gigstad. So ultimately, the voters have to decide. Those are two of the Democrats running. So ultimately, what the voters have to decide is this personal baggage that it seems many of the candidates in District 4 and where they vote on issues and what matters to them. I wish none of them had this personal baggage.
I'm going to push back on one thing. I don't think it's fair to put the endorsement of Mr. Ozowski in the same category as some of these other things. You and I share the same feelings of Brandon Pritchard and that faction of the Republican Party. I don't like them. But that is a policy disagreement, not a potentially criminal behavior or unethical behavior. It's not unethical for them to see the world the way they see it. They're just wrong from our point of view. So I don't think it's fair to put that in the same category.
Those are all data points that voters need to determine what that line is and what matters. I think Claire Corey and whoever the Dem Senate candidate is up there, I think it might be Gigstad, are going to have dramatic policy differences. Does Claire Corey's DUI matter when you're discussing policy things? Ultimately, the voters.
I think it speaks to character, and I think it's and the thing is so much of that's outside. I mean, look at the national election where we have mountains of evidence about the character of certain candidates, and it's for a lot of voters it doesn't seem to matter, and it's very unfashionable for me to sit here and say that it should matter. For me, Sarah's, and the thing is, I'm also very forgiving about people who struggle with drugs and alcohol. I supported Ryan Rauschenberger, who went to, who got treatment while in office and then ultimately won re-election at one point. And obviously he's had other incidents as well. I want to be sympathetic to people who struggle with substances. I don't think it's automatically disqualifying. Alcohol, in my mind, isn't cocaine, and again, Sarah hasn't specifically admitted, although she's also not answering the question. She said she's experimented. I'm not exactly, she has to answer questions about what that means. That's as far as an answer as I've gotten out of her. To me, that behavior is just, it's different than alcohol abuse. It's on a different level in my mind, and it's very close to her. I mean, when people are getting ready to run for office, the conventions are in spring, right? And they're campaigning before that. I haven't looked at when she formed her campaign committee. It probably wasn't that far after October.
Yeah, no, I think you're probably right. I bet it was January timeline would be my guess, and it's when a lot of the candidates announce. Again, like it's the in office versus out of the office that sort of is a line for me. And this is not good behavior. This is not good behavior for any human being. Do I think being in a bathroom stall with three people doing cocaine is a good look for Sadie Hansen as well? Probably not. I mean, I think that...
But also, she's not on the ballot right now. She was on the ballot earlier this year.
But she is the District 42 chair. I mean, she does have an official capacity within the Republican Party. It's not a good look for anyone. I am not justifying this behavior from Sarah. I wish we weren't having this conversation about any of these candidates. I wish we hadn't been talking about Scott Meyer a few weeks ago either. We'll get to the election predictions, but it's frustrating, Rob. I'm with you. I'm frustrated that like this stuff is happening. Yeah, that was close. I almost got a beat.
Yeah, it is very frustrating, and we can do better. I think part of the problem is too is as the person whose reporting reveals a lot of this behavior, not always me, but, we get the blame in the media. Like, why are you bringing this up? And it's like, they did this. I didn't make them go in the bathroom and be in that picture. I didn't make them take that picture. I didn't make Scott Myers write the things that he wrote on social media. I didn't make Jim Casper write the things he wrote on social media. I didn't make Nico Rios react to the arresting officers when he was arrested for DUI last year and used homophobic slurs and made bigoted comments and threatened, made political threats that he was going to get his political friends to come in and punish the police officers. I didn't make him do that. He did them, and I brought it before the public. Quit shooting the messengers, and that's the untold part of. There is a tribalism that surrounds this, and it's all, okay, we did this, but they did that, and they did that, and we did this, and it's got to stop. There's got to be a standard, and if you're below the standard, then you're out.
Yeah, and that's what's hard. I mean, what we're seeing in District 42 is a real muddying of the waters. And again, I think ultimately people are going to have to determine what their line is for standards. And I mean, like you and I, well, I mean, we had a pretty frank conversation this morning before we went on air about, hypocrisy and that sort of response that maybe I have to somebody I know and I like, and I know her family versus some other folks that maybe I have different opinions about from policy perspectives and personally. And it's hard. It's hard to take a step back and figure out what that line is because, Rob, you and I don't want to admit that there's tribalism in the way we handle things. There's going to be. And so that's hard.
I mean, earlier when we had to correct ourselves when we were putting Doug Ozowski, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his last name right. When we're putting him in the same, we need to draw a line. Just because we don't like them doesn't mean that they're bad. You know, so it is a difficult thing to overcome. I am consciously trying to overcome it. I know I'm not perfect, and it is very hard too. I'm a human being. I look at people, I talk with people in politics all the time. Some of them I come to have a great deal of respect for. I have a lot of affinity for, and then they do something and I end up reporting about it. And that is very, very hard for me. And it's hard for me to take a step back from my personal feelings and say, this is still a story and it's got to be told. And I have to make an awkward call to them. It is so hard.
Yeah. And it is, again, I think the story that you wrote was worthy of telling. I think that this is the sort of information that voters should know. Do I personally think that this is on the same level as some of those other things? No, that doesn't mean I don't think that voters should be aware of it, though. I mean, people ultimately have to make their own decision. If Sarah wins, then, you know, a week from now, you and I will be having another conversation about how to handle it, right?
Yeah.
But between now and Tuesday, she's not leaving the ballot. Scott's not leaving the ballot.
And again, they cannot leave the ballot. I mean, and if they wanted to, they couldn't get themselves off the ballot.
And so, again, like, I wish 4 or 5 days before the election, I wish this wasn't what we're talking about, but I feel like this is the kind of stuff that's coming top down from the presidential race. We like to think in North Dakota, like I said about Scott Meyer, that this stuff doesn't happen here. This stuff happens here. We're not that different.
And we're not. All right, let's get to predictions. And let's start with some legislative races. You may have some different ones that you're looking at. I'm looking at District 10. I'm looking at District 40. District 10 is, the question is whether or not Jared Hendricks is going to, in a very purple district, is going to be able to get over the line as being kind of a, you know, pretty far right Republican. Jim Casper. And by the way, both Hendricks and Casper have come under fire from other Republicans. You know, Pat Finken and the Brighter Future Alliance and some Republican donors put some money into that. You know, they've had ads. So District 46 and also District 24. I am wondering whether or not Dan Johnston can win in District 24. And I think that surprises a lot of people, but the Democratic, once upon a time, that was a purple district. It's Valley City. Maybe it's not anymore, but I've been hearing some things that the Democrats are running pretty strong. And that's one it's kind of caught my attention as well. And now Chad's looking at me like, what are your predictions, Rob? My prediction is I don't think Hendricks is going to win in 10. I think Casper's probably going to pull it out in District 46, and I think Johnston is probably going to win in 24.
Yeah, so let me just say, first of all, my screen went dark for a minute, so I missed a lot of your lead up. So that was that weird look that I had on my face. I was having a computer issue, and sometimes that's just my face. Let me tell you, District 10, I think all the incumbents win. So I think it's the Conning, Swantek, and Braunberger win.
Swantek's a Republican, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think in District 46, I actually think that the Dems pick up 2 of those 3 seats. I think that potentially the Senate seat swings, and then I also could see Reisenauer beating Casper. I have no data to back up these decisions. So like most predictions, a lot of it's based on my heart. And I think the Republicans in District 24 win all those seats as well. I think Johnston does win that seat. So the other ones I was thinking about are 18 and 42. I mean, we just talked about the ugliness up there. Again, I think Grand Forks has changed probably more dramatically and gotten more conservative in the last 10 to 15 years than any other community in North Dakota. It just swung. District 42, I don't think from the beginning is a particularly winnable race for Democrats. Just because they redrew the line. This isn't the same district that Max Schneider and Kyle Oberson represented. So I think I think the Republicans sweep all of those seats. I think that will be unfortunate because of the Doug fellow we talked about earlier. I don't know it's going to be good for the legislature. And then I think in 18, you know, I think there could be like the Corey Mock seat is in District 18. A Dem has won that in the past. You have Mary Adams, your old friend Mary Adams is running there. I think you could see a Dem win a seat or 2 in District 18. I'm not sure which ones, but I could see them winning a couple seats there in District 18, sort of working class Grand Forks.
Overall, and again, there's so little data on these legislative races, and even money. You can look at a candidate who raises a bunch of money. Legislative candidates who raise a bunch of money lose all the time. So I don't know I don't know. We're basing this. This is gut feelings, and I generally agree with what you're saying. I think overall, I think we're probably going to see a pretty status quo in terms of the numbers in the legislature. I think maybe a couple seats get swapped. Maybe it's hard to imagine the Democratic minority getting much smaller. It could.
Yeah.
But
particularly with the redistricting that was done up in the reservation communities, where they combine those districts, I think there's probably going to be a Senate seat up there that goes to the Dems. So I think you're still looking at maybe a +1 on the Dem side and maybe a +1 or 2 on the House side. Yeah. But I could just as well see it going -1, -1 or 2. But you're right. There's not going to be a huge swing. I think the real question was in June. Traditional versus Bastiat Republicans, where we saw the traditionals do a little bit.
I think if the traditionals hadn't done as well as they had in June, we'd be having a much different discussion about some of these legislative races right now.
Yeah, and I also think that if without Pritchard there, if Hendricks loses, if Casper loses, just those few different things, those few different incumbents losing, I think is going to change the tone if those things happen. Pritchard not being there is going to be better for the chamber. It's going to be better for the Republican Party. The same thing goes for Hendricks and Casper as well.
Agreed. Statewide races.
Yeah.
Before we get to the ballot measures, really the state level executive branch races, I don't really perceive any of these as being competitive. I guess we could talk about whether or not. So I think the really interesting one is the federal races. And less so because I'm uncertain about the outcome. Again, I think Republicans are going to win. I think the question is, can Katrina Christensen and Trygve Hammer, who've been running pretty hard and are probably the most competitive Democratic candidates we've had since Heidi Heitkamp in the Senate and since Earl Pomeroy, frankly, in the House. The question is, can they get to 40%? Because I think getting to 40% is a real victory for them. I think they're going to get close. I'm expecting upper 30s. I'm not sure they're going to hit 40.
Yeah, I say for both of those races, it's 38 is where they'll end up landing. And I actually think Katrina's run a better campaign than Trygve, but I think there's also probably some gender bias that helps Trygve versus Julie versus Katrina versus Kevin Cramer. And then I think Kelly Armstrong outperforms both Kevin Cramer and Julie Fedorchak. I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of difference because we don't have a lot of crossover voters these days, but I could see Kelly Armstrong getting, 72, 73, something like that.
It's really interesting when you say gender bias too, because it's surprising where that gender bias comes from and how often it comes from women.
Other women. Yeah, no, you're exactly right.
It's wrong. I mean, when I looked at it, we haven't had much polling in those federal races, but the little we have, you see it there. And you see it in the national polling with Kamala Harris on the national ballot. We're going to get to her in a little bit here, but very, very interesting where that bias comes from. It's going to be interesting to me to see, because Kelly Armstrong, to me, is the out of a lot of strong Republican candidates is potentially the strongest in that he's super well known as the congressman. He's not as polarizing as a Kevin. It's going to be interesting to see where a Cramer and a Fedorchak and even Trump kind of measuring where they end up, the size of their wins, and whether or not, has Trump become less popular in North Dakota, after January 6th and everything? I don't know. I mean, maybe not, but I'm going to be watching that. I think it's going to be very interesting.
I also think Kelly has the advantage of the weakest campaign run against him. I mean, Trygve and Katrina have raised literally millions of dollars. Merrill hasn't raised much money and hasn't done nearly as much as those other two. So, I mean, part of the question that I'm looking at is sort of a long-term what the state looks like. Does it matter? Or are we just all a bunch of all vote for Democrats, all vote for Republicans? If you don't see a big difference between Kelly Armstrong, Donald Trump, Kevin Cramer, and Julie Fedorchak, that tells me we haven't broken any sort of cycle in terms of Republicans vote for Republicans and Democrats vote for Democrats.
No, it's going to be interesting to see the degree to which North Dakota voters get their appetite back for ticket splitting, because once upon a time it was even as late as 2012. When you look at that 2012 ballot, when Heidi Heitkamp held on to that Senate seat that was Kent Conrad's previously, there were other Republicans on the ballot. I mean, there were a lot of voters who voted for other Republicans and then voted for Heidi Heitkamp over Rick Berg. There was a lot of ticket splitting. That wasn't that, well, it was 12 years ago now, but not that long ago, really. 3 presidential cycles. So, could we get it back? I mean, that's kind of, I don't know if we will or not. I'm not making a prediction per se, but I think it's something both you and I are watching.
Right.
Because it could pretend things for future cycles.
Yeah, I mean, you've talked about 2012. Jack Dalrymple did okay as the governor's candidate in 2012. I think he got 72.
Yeah, he didn't have many problems, like high 60s, low 70s, something like that. Yeah. Okay, ballot measures. Ballot measure 1, I think, is sometimes the thing I worry with something about ballot measure 1 is that people don't hear a lot about it before election day, and then they get there, and if they're confused about it, there's always the chance that they could vote no.
Oh, yeah, I think this one is easy to understand.
It's very easy to understand because it's just we have some outdated language that doesn't live up to maybe modern standards of.
Rob, I got to tell you what somebody told me recently about Measure 1 being sarcastic. They're like, I'm voting no on number 1. It's too woke.
Well, I don't think we need to call it the deaf and dumb school anymore.
Yeah, amen.
So that by the way, that's what that measure does. If you don't know, we have some of these institutions in North Dakota are named in the Constitution, and their names are like 1930s, 1940s era name, or even probably before that. And they're just it's just renaming them. It makes no policy changes really at all. So I think that one's going to pass. We probably don't need to spend as much time talking about it. Measure 2, I think, is going to fail, and that's going to be my official prediction. The one thing that gives me pause is that North Dakota News Cooperative poll, which was kind of a problematic poll, but it surprised me when it showed Measure 2 up. Yeah. I think the thing, though, is that the undecideds are going to be confused about it. I think there's kind of a built-in thing where it's very easy for opponents of it to say, well, they're trying to steal power away from voters. And that's a very easy argument to make. I think it's going to fail, but part of me, I don't want to say I wouldn't be surprised, but there's a part of me that thinks maybe something weird could happen there.
Yeah, I think Measure 2 goes down, and I think that poll may have given me pause at the time, but that was before the Measure 2 no vote started running their ads and all those kind of things. And you have the predisposition of, a big chunk of undecided votes. I mean, those folks generally break 60% to 70%. I've heard some people tell me that on ballot measures, people break 80% no if they're undecided this late in the game. And so I think it goes down. I also think the no side had the advantage of the yes folks not running a campaign. That's always beneficial. It's hard to get a yes vote, especially when you don't try.
Yeah, and they didn't make an affirmative argument. I'm going to be interested in the vote total yes, even if it loses, just because, and I'm hearing from a lot of people who agree with me that we have some deep-seated problems with the initiated measure process, who just but this doesn't fix the problem. I am going to be interested in what that yes vote, because I think that the no vote people are kidding themselves if they don't think, and again, I mean, it's starting to be cycle after cycle where we're seeing these big interest groups come in, drop a lot of money, buy their way onto the ballot. There's going to be more appetite for reform. That issue's not going away, even if it loses.
So, Rob, I would just also add, I think it'd be beneficial for the people who are proponents of a Measure 2 to put it on the ballot themselves and not have the legislature do it. Because I also think that sort of, if the message is the legislature is trying to take away your power, and then the legislature is the one that puts it on the ballot, that's not very good messaging. So I'm interested to see how there has to be a real conversation about how we can do this better, but this doesn't solve the problems we're trying to solve.
That's fair. Measure 3, I think it's going to pass. It's another one that's kind of confusing. Maybe people haven't heard, but it does have an easy argument where it makes it harder to, I mean, you could say it makes it, even though this is simplifying maybe too much, you could say it makes it harder to spend legacy fund principal. And I think that's a winning argument with North Dakota voters.
I too think it's going to pass. It's the one measure that I'm getting asked the most about. Like you, I'm assuming people ask you, what do you think about the measure sort of thing? So yeah,
I think it's going to pass. Measure 4, I think is going to fail. And I don't think it's going to be particularly close. I do think it's going to be closer than 12. When I say 12, but it's closer than in the version of the ballot measure to abolish property taxes that was on the ballot, the June ballot 2012. The no vote got over 70%. I don't know that it gets over 70% this time. I think it's going to be in the 60s, but I think it's going to be narrower, and I think that's going to be a reflection of ongoing angst about this issue. Now, Chad, of course, is the head of the anti-Measure 4 campaign, so we can kind of guess what his prediction is going to be. But
yeah, I mean, I think that you're right that it's not going to get the 77%, which it got in 2012. I think we're going to be somewhere in the 65 range on the no vote. Maybe even 60-40. I think that frustration around property taxes is real, but I will make a prediction. If the legislature does not do something significant to reform property taxes this next session, it's going to be on the ballot again and it's going to pass.
I agree with that. I agree with that. The voters are going to feel betrayed again. There has got to be real substantial property tax relief, and local governments had better brace themselves because something's coming. And if they don't like it, I would argue you probably could have avoided this. Some of you, and it's always hard when you're talking about local governments because some of them have done a great job. Some of them have not. And that's one of the difficult things in talking about this issue is you're talking about so many, even within a community, you're talking about a half dozen taxing entities.
Well, and even within a community, I mean, I don't know any facts about Grand Forks, but let's say that the city commission spends a bunch of money and the school boards keeps the property taxes low, or the park boards, it's all four of those entities having to work together to keep them low. It can't just be one jacking them up and the other three trying to keep things low. So there has to be something substantial. I'm confident, if our predictions on the governor's race come true, that Kelly Armstrong is not going to let the legislators leave Bismarck until they do some substantial reform on property taxes.
It's got to happen because otherwise we're going to get a ballot measure, and the ballot measure may be a cure that's worse than the disease.
Right.
Okay, so
we're facing here with Measure 4, right? I mean, the cure is going to be worse than the disease, but people got to figure that out.
But there may come a point where property taxpayers say, I'm willing to roll the dice because we're getting nothing from Bismarck and we're getting nothing from the local governments either.
And I think saying nothing is probably unfair, but that's what they're feeling, right? That's what they're feeling.
That's going to be their perception, whether that perception is fair or not. That's what it's going to be. And in politics, perception is reality. So
it's a vibe election, man.
Yeah. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. All right, Measure 5. I'm interested in what you think. This is the tough one for
you're gonna make me go first.
I am.
On this.
I am. Yes.
Man, I think it passes.
You think so?
I think it passes very, very close. I think this might be the closest thing on the ballot.
I was at a Halloween party and somebody asked me. They said, why do you think it's going to be closer? And I said, because I think there's a certain generation of voters that are dying out. I think that's what keeps happening. There's a certain generation that has an attitude about marijuana that's not shared by young. I think it's very much an age-driven issue, and it's gonna take it's just gonna take a shifting demographic. So I think there's a very good chance that it could pass this time. If it doesn't pass this time,
there's going to be a good chance. Yes or no? What's your prediction, Port?
I think it's going to pass. I will add this and say if it doesn't pass, I think it's going to pass next time for the age demographic thing shifting. Also, Pat Finken is retiring.
Yeah, I will tell you, I mean, that is something that Pat Finken has delivered a very strong message on the vote no side. Again, I don't know how much money they spent to out there or the yes side for that matter, but he's articulated a very good message. I've talked to him a couple of times where he said, I will say, man, you haven't convinced me, but you're going to convince a lot of other people to vote no on this thing.
I think that if Pat's not there anymore, if this fails this time and it comes up again in a future cycle, if Pat's not there to rally the no argument, it'll pass pretty easily. But we'll see what happens. All right. Now the one that I don't really even want to talk about this. I'm so tired of it, but the presidential election. And I'm tempted to just tell you, I don't know. And you shouldn't believe anybody who tells you they know. What I'm going to give you is a guess.
Yeah, that's the right answer, Rob. Nobody knows. And if anybody tells you they know, they're full of it. They're full of it.
Yeah. There's the polling tells us nothing. It's contradictory. It's been really interesting. And I think this is something we're going to have to watch because we've become so dependent on these polling aggregators. And we have seen where we're seeing polls from partisan sources kind of flood the zone. And I think that has made this very, very hard to see. I am worried about either side becoming supremely confident and then feeling that because they were so confident going in, that the election was stolen or what have you. I don't want to see that happen. I think I actually have a column that's going to run on Saturday that touches on how it feels to lose the World Series and talking about how important it is to just accept the loss. Sometimes you lose, and losing is a part of democracy as well. So that's what I would encourage people right now. Your inboxes and your social media feeds and everything are being inundated with all sorts of wild stories about people are stealing votes and people are doing this, that, and the other thing. For your mental health, it might behoove you to just tune out. Maybe just take a vacation from it for a while, because there is not a lot of good journalism being done right now in national politics.
Well, Rob, what I will tell you is I don't know one Democrat who's overconfident since they lived through 2016. So I don't think you have to worry about too many Democrats thinking we've got this one in the bag and then think that there's some conspiracy of why they lost. I think there's some Democrats who can't figure out for the life of them how this race is close when Democrats are on the same side as Dick Cheney and they still have this close race. So I'll start.
Although I would argue that it's the Cheneys, Liz and Dick Cheney, are on the same side of Democrats, and I think that's important. And I think that even if Kamala Harris pulls this out, I think Democrats have got to figure out how they can appeal to the center again. I think starting in I don't know when it started, but Democrats very much shifted to a very campus style of liberal progressivism. I think it permeated the party in a lot of ways, and it has turned so many people off. And they have got to move past it.
The problem with your theory, though, is they're also getting 6 million more votes in national general elections than the Republicans. So what they're providing is something that the majority of Americans like. It's just not what the majority of people in the majority of states like. But
that's the game in America. Yeah. And I guess we could have a debate about the Electoral College. I don't think we want to start that at this point in the program. But
I'm going to make my prediction instead. You ready?
Okay, here we go.
Kamala wins 284 to 254. She wins Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina.
Wow, you got very specific. I was not prepared to be that specific.
Listen, I'm not going into these prediction shows and just like half butting them. This is very so. Who do you think is going to win? Let's start there.
I think Trump's going to win. I say that, and it's so hard for me because I don't know if I'm overcorrecting because I so don't want him to win, and so then I'm worried that I'm going to say Kamala's going to win because because I want it to be, and I'm choosing to read the data and the tea leaves that way. But I think he's going to pull it out. And the reason why is when I'm looking at the polling in Georgia, in Arizona, in even places like Michigan, I think it's going to be tough for her. And I
think doesn't need Arizona and Georgia. She doesn't. Pennsylvania.
But Elon Musk has been all over Pennsylvania. I don't know it's so weird. I don't know what the impact of it's going to be.
Yeah. No, and that's the problem, right? I mean, I think you nailed it at the beginning. Nobody knows. And, you're sort of, do I want her to win? So there's some of that going on with me. There's no doubt about that. But I have been talking to some people I trust who are looking at the details of the early vote, and that GOP early vote is up. But it's mostly people who usually vote on election day. These aren't new voters, and Democrats are seeing more new voters in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin.
The last time I looked, the Democratic early vote in Pennsylvania, the Democrats were way ahead of Republicans too, by the way, which is given how key Pennsylvania is.
So I think what people need to look at here is like we saw 4 years ago. I mean, Dems are going to run up the score on early vote. Those are the last votes that are counted. And so Trump's going to be way up in Pennsylvania again, not by as much as he was last time, because a lot of the Republicans are now voting early, but it's going to be substantial, and it's going to be probably 500,000 votes. And then once Philadelphia and the early votes come in, is that enough to tie it up? So I would just caution people that if they think they're going to know the result of this on Tuesday night or Wednesday, I think we're looking at another Friday or Saturday situation because Pennsylvania is and please count all the votes. I don't want to hear stop the count like we did in 2020. Just count the damn votes and then we'll see who won.
I agree. But I think Trump's gonna pull it out. But I will maintain either way, Democrats have got to ask themselves, because Trump, why are you this close with this guy?
Right.
And they need to be thinking more about how to appeal more nationally as a party. I mean, what the Electoral College requires is that you have to appeal to more people in more parts of the country. And I kind of like that. I don't necessarily want a country that's governed by people who can run up the vote in Los Angeles and New York and these other places. It needs to be more reflective, especially living in the part of the world that we do. It needs to reflect us too.
I also think in addition to Democrats thinking about it, Americans need to think about it, right? What do we want from our president? What does Trump doing to appeal to us that we need to figure out? And I think, again, it all comes down to Pennsylvania. Trump wins Pennsylvania, it's done.
Yeah. We do need to stop being so cynical, because I think what plays into a lot of this, we say, well, it's okay that Trump is all these things, or even that a Democrat is all these things, or whatever we make. And it really goes back to what we started talking about at the beginning of this segment, where we make excuses for the people we like, or we assume we're so cynical, we just assume they're all doing it, so it doesn't matter. It does matter. And we got to stop being so cynical. Character matters, behavior matters. All right. So that's it. Those are our predictions, and everybody can make fun of us on Wednesday, because that's the next time you're going to be hearing us. You can make fun of us on Wednesday. Talking about it. We're going to have Pat Finken on, by the way. We can talk about his retirement a little bit. He's always great to talk to about, especially with state and legislative races. But until then, thank you so much for listening. And by the way, you're going to hear it. You've heard an ad. We're going to have a new phone number. If you want to participate in the show that way, you could send texts, you could send voicemails, and we will respond to them. We're not a live show, so we can't take live calls. But if you send those stuff in, I'm not going to guarantee that you'll make it to the show, but it's another way to kind of send us your feedback. If you want to shoot us a text or we'll have the vote number. You'll hear the number in the ads. Use it. And it might be fun.
Yeah. And just so you know, I get to see the feedback too. So it's not just Rob going to be, making sure all the good port stuff comes through and the anti-Oban bump never.
I'm more worried about you using bots or something and flooding the zone about the Oban bump.
That's a great idea. If I knew how to do that, let me reach out to my friend Elon.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, by the way, after Chad and I will be on the show Wednesday and Friday next week, and then the week after it'll be Corey Mock and Jessica Bell, two former Corey's still a lame duck lawmaker, but it'll be them. And Jessica Bell used to be a state senator, and Jessica, by the way, was already texting me that we're going to have a Bell bump.
Oh my gosh, here we go. The Bell bump.
Bell bump. All right. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Send me an email at rport@forumcom.com. That's forumcom with 2 M's.com. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. The Yankees need to find the corpse of Tom Amansky